We're going to lead off this morning with the powerful winter storm system that's already impacted more than 24 states.
Overnight, that system swept through the Northeast, bringing freezing temperatures and several inches of snow in some areas, places that haven't seen much snow this season. NBC News correspondent Kristen Dahlgren is in Windsor, Connecticut with the latest.
Hey, good morning. Well, we are just north of Hartford, Connecticut, and you can see it's still coming down as it has been all night. Take a look. If you pull out a little bit here, you can see, a couple of inches of snow. And normally we might not be talking about that in Connecticut. It is winter in the Northeast after all, but this is not your average winter. And so for this area, this is the first significant snowfall of the season. Also the first significant snowfall in New York City, only about a half an inch so far this season. And now the city seeing a few inches of snow. So Boston as well getting its first significant snowfall of the season. So really just an unusual winter and unusual storm. This is the same storm that caused problems across the Midwest. People in Michigan, hundreds of thousands without power. That is being restored as we go through today. This storm also touched off tornadoes across the Midwest. One suspected tornado doing pretty significant damage in Ohio, and then a few more tornadoes confirmed across the Midwest. So a really big storm causing problems for millions of people. It is expected to continue here throughout the day. They are ready for it. They have hundreds of plows out on the roads. They pre-salted the roads to get ready for the storm. So you can see traffic still moving. We've seen a lot of plows going through. Power companies have staged crews ready for any power outages here. So this is a storm that they're ready for, but people being urged to still stay off the roads for a few more hours as this snow continues. Back to you.
All right, Kristen, thank you so much.
And as we just heard, residents in the Northeast are waking up to a cold, wet, and snowy morning.
So let's bring in meteorologist Angie Lastman for a check on your morning news now weather. Good morning, Angie.
Good morning, guys. Can you believe it? We waited till the last day of meteorological winter to have any kind of significant snowfall in places like New York City, which, by the way, did pick up a couple of inches, anywhere from 1 to 3 inches, a little more outside of the city. And you can see still dealing with snow falling in places like Hartford, Boston, and parts of New England. That's what we'll deal with for a little while longer. So the commute is going to be a little difficult in those places. And we still have millions under these winter alerts at this hour. We're going to continue to see maybe a couple more inches picked up here through the rest of the day. The highest amounts will be probably 6 to 8 inches. And again, in those higher elevations and the farther north you go into places like Maine, that's where you'll see the more significant snowfall. But then the system moves out and we're going to see improvements. It moves out. We'll still deal with some of these lingering snow showers for, again, northern parts of New England, even into the evening hours tonight. But by the time you get up and out the door tomorrow, things will have improved a lot. Now, on the West Coast, we're going to track our next storm system that's going to bring us some severe weather here as we get into the later parts of our work week. And then eventually it'll bring us another chance of some rain and some snow for parts of the east. So we've got a couple things to deal with before the week's end, and it's going to impact a lot of places across the country. It starts with the West Coast, where millions are again under these winter weather alerts. California is going to get a little more rain and a little more snow, not quite as intense as what they dealt with that past storm, the last one that they were seeing really impact them last week. But still, some additional rain, some additional snow. Eventually, the system tracks to the east. It does bring snow to parts of the Rockies, the Four Corners region. And then we start to gear up those severe storms as we head into tomorrow, into Thursday, and into Friday. This is going to be kind of a long couple of days when it comes to afternoon severe storms impacting places from the plains all the way to the southeast through the end of our work week. So a week that you're going to want to stay connected as far as the weather is concerned. Rainfall totals rather in California, not super impressive, but they really don't need this on top of what they dealt with last week. We will see additional snowfall in places like the Sierras and in the Rockies, up to 12 inches, maybe over that here as we get into those higher elevations once again. But when we get into Wednesday, tomorrow, the biggest impacts are going to be focused mainly towards Little Rock, Texarkana, Shreveport, Tupelo, Memphis, all included in the best chance to see some of these really strong winds, damaging hail, and even a couple of tornadoes. And we'll see that threat kind of continue in that same area, guys, as we get into Thursday, moving just a little farther to the east here as we get into Friday. So a really busy kind of couple of days for us with the snow here, and then we'll see another chance at it here as we get into Friday.
All right, another busy week ahead. Thanks, Angie.
Angie, thank you. Now to South Carolina, where the defense rested their case in the Alex Murdaugh double murder trial as the judge granted the defense request for the jury to visit the scene of the crime. NBC News correspondent Katie Beck has the latest.
The Murdaugh trial jury will go to the crime scene. The judge granting an unusual motion for jurors to physically visit the dog kennel area on the sprawling 1,700-acre hunting property. The defense argues the visit will help them spatially understand where the bodies of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were located and see the small space inside the feed room where Paul was killed.
If the defense wants a jury view, then the court will arrange a jury view.
Also Monday, a defense blood spatter expert saying it's unlikely the murders were done by a single shooter.
To me, there's structurally difficult for the same shooter to have two long arms and no practical reason for that to happen.
And after lunch, the final defense witness, Alex Murdaugh's younger brother, John Marvin.
It's the hardest thing I've ever been through in my life.
Giving emotional testimony about returning to the crime scene the day after the murders to clean up Paul's remains, including pieces of his skull.
And I can promise you, no mother or father or aunt or uncle should ever have to see and do what I did that day.
John Marvin also recounting how during a visit to assist SLED investigators, he was offered false information about case evidence.
But described the white T-shirt covered in blood, even went so far as to describe that Alex took the bottom of it and wiped his face with it.
Katie Beck, thank you so much. And while the defense has rested their case, prosecutors say they may have 4 or 5 more witnesses before heading to closing arguments later this week.
To Ohio now, where the cleanup is underway after that toxic train derailment. The EPA has allowed the removal of waste to resume. Despite this, people living there are still concerned about their health. NBC News correspondent George Solis has the very latest.
Federal officials now saying there are 4 disposal sites this hazardous material will be shipped to. Meanwhile, residents in East Palestine, 3 weeks post-derailment, still have many concerns about their town's future. Emotions still running high in East Palestine, Ohio.
The most frustrating part is Norfolk Southern is making me question whether I'm a good parent.
3 weeks since the Norfolk Southern toxic train derailment, Sharice Munyon, mother of 2, says she's feeling trapped between a sea of information and instinct.
I have a 10-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son, and are they going to, in 10 years, be diagnosed with cancer that's from this?
These renewed fears come as truckloads of hazardous waste from the site are once again on the move. After the EPA temporarily paused shipments over the weekend, they're now being transported from East Palestine to EPA-vetted disposal sites in nearby cities.
The addition of these disposal locations gets us closer to having enough capacity to finish the cleanup.
Officials in Michigan and Texas irate over what they say was a surprise delivery of tons of contaminated waste from the derailment.
The outward effect of it looks like we're being sandbagged.
Ohio's governor announcing 5 truckloads of contaminated soil were returned to East Palestine. As the NTSB continues its investigation, Norfolk Southern says it continues to work on track removal at the site as well as soil excavation, while the CDC continues door-to-door survey efforts to check on residents.
Has anyone been to your door?
Not one person.
And what does that tell you?
That they don't care.
That was George Solis reporting. NBC News has learned EPA Administrator Michael Regan will visit East Palestine today. It's his 3rd visit since the disaster 3 weeks ago, as response efforts there shift from emergency phase to long-term remediation. Voters in Chicago are gearing up to cast their ballots in this year's heated primary race for mayor. 9 candidates are on the ballot this year, including incumbent Lori Lightfoot. All the candidates aim to lead a city hit hard by crime and inflation in recent years. NBC News correspondent Marissa Parra joins us now from Hyde Park in Chicago with more. Marissa, good morning. So let's start with the candidates. You got the incumbent Lori Lightfoot facing tough competition in a race that's likely going to head into a runoff. So who are her biggest opponents and how tough could re-election be?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about what we're expecting from today, I think something that's just so notable is that there is not a sense of confidence as to whether or not we will see Lori Lightfoot reelected. And that could be in several ways, right? I mean, there's not even a sense of confidence in terms of whether she would make that runoff race that would happen in April 4th, just over a month from now. So when we talk about her biggest competition right now, obviously, Joe, we know that polls in general are never a guarantee of anything. anything. But polling does show that her steepest competition is coming from the former Chicago Public Schools CEO, Paul Vallis. And then there's a very tight race in terms of the polling for second place. And so we're looking at there's Lori Lightfoot right now is kind of neck and neck with two other candidates. But you mentioned it yourself. There's a large field here right now. Incumbent Mayor Lori Lightfoot competing with 8 other challengers. So, Joe, I think that in terms of what we can predict, the only prediction that I'm willing to make is that we probably will not know any results by 7 p.m. simply because we know that early voting turnout nearly triple what it has been in past 2 municipal elections. We know that mail-in voting also record numbers here, Joe.
All right, so those are the candidates. What are the issues that voters are most concerned about? And are there things that the rest of the country might learn from this election?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the fact that crime has been consistently the #1 thing that voters in Chicago talk about that they care about. And this is something that we're seeing across the city. And then also something that certain candidates have been very, very intentional in terms of their messaging. And I think that in terms of what we're seeing in terms of platform and policy, while crime might be something that they're all addressing, it's the philosophy in terms of how they're addressing crime, where, of course, they differ and the roads split, if you will, whether or not they're looking for short-term solutions or whether or not they're looking at whether they should be staffing police officers or whether they are thinking that tackling crime looks more holistically building the community on the other side.
And on the issue of crime, we know Chicagoans are also electing police district council members. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we have 66 positions up for grabs. This is something that advocacy groups have been pushing for. We know that this is something that's been part of the conversation on a national level. We're seeing that here in Chicago for the first time. 22 Chicago police districts will now see community members who will be able to weigh in on things like police budget. They will be able to weigh in and review items. When it comes to controversial topics, we're talking about Chicago police here in Chicago. This has been something that has been part of the discussion for a long time. But I think in terms of who people are voting for, when I've just talked to people on the ground here, I will say that a lot of them don't really know who they're voting for, and they're not really sure how this is going to turn out. So I think collectively we're all eager to see how that does play out, not just today with how the election day goes, but in the coming years. Joe?
All right, Marissa Parra in Chicago. Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.